Okay, good morning everyone. Hazak Baruch. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Wednesday morning as we are starting together Perashat Vayetzeh. Perashat Vayetzeh, my friends, there is a fascinating, very important midrash, and it's a famous midrash, and on it I want to share with you something that a great rabbi from the last century, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, has famously said on this midrash, and to elaborate on this concept for today's class. The midrash over here is found right in the beginning of the Perashah. Again, Perashat Vayetzeh, and the Perashah says the midrash says as follows: Vayetzeh Yaakov meBe'er Shava. We're still on the first pasuk. I mean, there's so much to talk about, and what are we going to do? How are we going to get through the midrashim? Well, you got to start somewhere, right? Okay. God bless. Hiskiya Amar. Ben Samach Gimel Shanim Haya Yaakov Avinu Be'et Shenatal et Berachot. How old was Yaakov at this time when he went to get a wife? He was 63 years old when he took the blessings from his brother. Asa od Yud Dalid Shana Shenitman Bebet Ever. And he spent 14 more years in the yeshiva of Ever. Who was Ever? Eber was the great-grandson of Shem, who was Noah's son. So he was the great-great-grandson of Noah, Eber. There was a famous yeshiva called Shem ve'Ever. Shem was the great-grandpa, and he opened up a yeshiva with his great-grandson, great-grandson, Eber. And if you remember this yeshiva, this is the yeshiva, this is where Rivka went to when she was feeling the kicking in her stomach 63 years prior. Remember? And she went to, Pasuk says, Vatelech lidrosh et Adonai. She went to seek God. How did she speak to God? She spoke to the rabbis in the yeshiva. Shem ve'Ever. Well, at this point, Shem passed away. And Shem died when Jacob was 50. So it was no longer yeshiva Shem ve'Ever, and now it just became the yeshiva ve'Eber. And Yaakov goes there for 14 years, going to study Torah. Asa od sheva shanim she'abad. Now, so we have 63 plus 14 is 77. And then another 7 years that he's working in Laban's house for Rachel. Nimtza ben pedaled shanim. 84. 84, also a famous number in Judaism. That's we know that anyone that the different segulot, whoever fasts is like whoever does this is like they did 84 fasts. Interesting number 84. Either way, not sure if there's any connection to that over here. But Yaakov is 84 when he gets married. Ve'esav ben 40 shana. Esav was 40 when he got married. Halamanu, we find Shakadosh Baruch Hu mashhel tzadikim. Sometimes God delays the blessing for the righteous, umakdim larshaim, and he hastens the blessing for the wicked. We know that is the way of the world. The wicked get things quickly, they get it faster, they get rewarded first, and they suffer later. The righteous suffer first, and they get rewarded later. That is always life. In school, the good kids, they were suffering, learning, studying. They didn't get to have a good time going to parties. But it catches up with you later on. You end up having good grades. You go to a good college. You get a good degree. You get a good job. And you live life and you're successful. And the guy who in school was having a good time in the beginning, maybe clowning around, later on he catches up to him. And he's now suffering. And that's life. You have to pay now or pay later. You pick. Well, Yaakov was 84 when he got married. And that's the Midrash. But what I want to share with you over here, and this is the source that Yaakov spent. Also, it's brought down in the Megillah, Masechet Megillah, that Yaakov spends 14 years studying Torah in the yeshiva of Shem ve'Ever. Now, the Gemara tells us in Masechet Megillah that actually Yaakov Avinu, we know he worked for 7 years for Rachel, and then another 7 for Leah, and then another 6 years he was working just for money. He had to support 4 wives. Okay, that's a lot of Montclair jackets. So he was there for 20 years, and then 2 more years he stayed on the way back. Yaakov Avinu basically, do the math, from 84, from 77, he was 22 years away from his home. And the Gemara says that he was punished, that since he didn't have respect, he didn't honor his parents for those 22 years. And again, what did he do wrong is an interesting question. He was sent to go get married. Why is that dishonoring? But he dishonored his parents for 22 years. So he was punished, midah keneged midah, measure for measure. And he lost his son Yosef for 22 years. You do the math. Yosef was taken. He was 12 years in jail. And then 7 years of famine. And then another 2 years of plenty. Basically and then 1 year before jail. 22 years altogether, Yosef was stripped from his father. So 22 years Yaakov didn't honor his parents, and he got punished 22 years of lost time with his son Joseph. But however, you notice here, as the Gemara points out, that he was not punished for those 14 years that Yaakov spent in Shem ve'Eved. He was not punished for those 14 years. He was only punished for the 22 years after. Clearly, our rabbis are telling us that the 14 years that Yaakov spent studying Torah was necessary. It was essential. And they were part of him listening to his parents. But the question is that this is really hard to understand. Because again, you're not talking about a 13-year-old kid. He didn't have to go to yeshiva to learn. Yaakov Avinu was 63 years old. What was he doing for 63 years? For 63 years, all he's doing is learning Torah. He was Yoshev Ohalim. He's the 10th guy. He's the pillar of, right? You know, the Torah, the world stands on 3 pillars, right? Money, no, I'm kidding, right? Torah, Avodah, Kimut Chasadim. Avraham is Chesed, Yitzchak is Avodah, and Yaakov is Torah. So he's learning for 63 years, the guy. Now it's time to get married. What, he needs another 14 years of Torah under his belt? Is 63 not enough? He learned with his father, his grandpa, Avraham. When Esav was hunting, Yitzchak was sitting with his grandpa reading, learning. Yaakov, was sitting with his grandpa reading, learning. So why are those 14 years, why are they so crucial that Yaakov gets away with it? That he gets to learn for 14 more years and there's no consequence. That was required. That was essential. Why are they not accounted for? Imagine a guy tells his son like this. He says, go get me something from the store. The kid, on the way to the store, decides to enroll himself in YU, in the yeshiva, whatever. And he learns Torah. And he starts learning. And he comes back a year later and he says, oh, here, Dad, here, I got you the item. Right? Surely that son, we would call him delinquent. He's lax, he's late. He didn't honor his father. Says Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, he addresses this question in his Sefer Emet LeYaakov. And he says something very beautiful, very powerful. He says we have to appreciate what exactly Yaakov learned in the yeshiva of Eved. And basically what Rav Yaakov explains is that there's 2 phases in a person's learning, 2 stages, 2 types of Torah that a person learns in their life. A person learns one type of Torah when they're in a protected environment. When you're young, when you're in a sheltered community, when I went to yeshiva after high school, and I learned. And it's beautiful. You learn. But that learning, you're learning in the tent of Avraham Avinu. You're learning where you're protected from the outside world. Right? It's perfect temperature. It's like, learning how to ski indoors. You go to American Dream, perfect size slope, no snow, no fog, music, right? You learn, perfect setting. Then you get onto the real mountain and you realize it's not as groomed. You realize there's a lot of temperature, there's a lot of wind. It's much colder than it was in the American dream. You realize there's things. Yaakov Avinu, when he learned Torah for 63 years of his life, he was learning under the guidance, under the protection, the safe haven of Yitzchak and Rivka, of Avraham. It was a world of bliss, of clarity. There was no tests. There was no challenges. Yaakov is learning. He's learning. Beautiful. Life is great. And this is how he got his foundation. You know, when you go to yeshiva after high school, you're sitting in a place where there's rabbis, there's no women, there's no money, hopefully there's no drugs, there's no tests. You're learning all day. What do you have to do? You go to the bed, you go to sleep, you wake up, you have breakfast, you have learning, you go back for lunch, you have your bed, right? I went to yeshiva, there were Persians there. They taught me Persian, okay? They taught me how to speak a few words. They said, there's 3 things that every yeshiva boy has to do. Bechun, Bechor, Bechab. Okay? If anyone here speaks Persian. Bechun, Bechor, Bechab. You gotta learn, you gotta eat, you gotta sleep. Okay? You gotta do 3 things. That's all you have. You're not stressed about feeding a family, about having to pay for bills, about working. That's the 63 years of Torah that Yaakov Avinu got. That's what he got from his father and his grandpa. That's the Torah that was pure, easy, flowing. Says Rav Yaakov, but then there comes the real world, where you got to leave the yeshiva. That represents a time where a person no longer is in the bubble. They got to go out, get out. They're opening a company. Now all the Gemara you learned about Baba Kama and honesty and not stealing and giving a guy his the price that you agreed on, all of a sudden all of that becomes very real. All of a sudden you're tested. All of a sudden you're sitting across a guy on a phone and you can make a few bucks. You just got to hide the truth. This is different type of Torah. Yeshiva doesn't prepare you for the real world. Yeshiva is, it's kind of like, you're taught, but you're not tested. Finally, the real test comes. When you go out into the world of Esav. And this is when you leave the bubble, when you leave the community, where you're going to encounter deceit, where you encounter lust and materialism, where you're meeting Lavans and Esavs, and the real challenges of staying true to who you are finally become real. Yaakov needed to learn not only how to be a good Jew when you're in the tents of Avraham, but how to be a good Jew in a world of Esav, in a complicated world. How do you stay religious there? That's much harder. You see a lot of times in a yeshiva setting, kids thrive. They do great. Then you see them come, they land back in America, they go back wherever they came from, and then all of a sudden you see what happened to the kid. What happened to the kid is that he was never taught the Torah of America. He was never taught the Torah of the outside bubble world. He was taught how to be a good Jew in the bubble, when everything's perfect temperature. But he wasn't equipped. That you need a different type of Torah. And hopefully in good yeshivas they teach the kids that. Yaakov Avinu knew 63 years is great, but it's not enough for me if I'm going to enter the world. Now that I'm going and dealing, you go in a Beit Midrash, we have that stage of life. We're sheltered. You live in a loving home. You live with the yeshiva. You live in a close-knit community. But every single person in this chat, every person listening, everyone in the world, comes a time in life where you go outside and you face the real world in whatever context, in whatever capacity. And there's tests and your values are going to be tested. And there's going to be pressures, and there's going to be distractions, and there's going to be things that you maybe not have learned when you were you didn't expect, you didn't have to worry about when you were in the community. Yeah. You have children. Children in their home, they're very sheltered when our kids are young. We don't let them watch certain movies. We don't let them do certain things. We don't let them go certain places. But there comes a point in a person's life where they're going to not be in the house anymore. And parents have to make sure that they equip their kids with 14 years of Shem Ve'ever Yeshiva. It's not enough that your kid got the 63 years from you. You have to teach your kid a special type of Torah. Says of Yaakov Kamenetsky, that's what Yaakov went to learn. Yaakov went to learn 14 more years. How do I deal with swindlers? How do I make sure not to become corrupted, not to get influenced, that they don't pull me down? Where do I get that from? And you have to go for 14 more years. And who better than Shem Ve'ever? Shem lived in the most corrupt generation, the flood. Ever lived through the Tower of Babel. They saw it. They lived it. They knew how to stay true when everyone around them was falling. So Yaakov needs 14 more years. Because if I'm going to succeed in my mission in Lavan's house. So Yaakov leaving his father's house. And his father says, go get married. Yaakov takes a pit stop and he spends 14 years in the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever. And by the way, he doesn't get punished for those 14 years because that's part of me listening to my father. My father would be very proud for me to go learn in that yeshiva. That's part of my mission. I need to spend my 14 years in the yeshiva. That's part of me growing to be able to handle what my father sent me to do. It's like, you know what it's like? We gave an example before. If a dad sends his son to go get him something and then the son goes to yeshiva, that he's going to get punished, that he's being delinquent. It would be very similar to a dad who sends his son to go pick him out a nice lulav and etrog. And then the son goes and he spends an hour or two studying with a rabbi. What is a kosher lulav and etrog? In that case, the son would not get punished for studying. Because that's part of his listening to his dad. To get him a good etrog, he needs to know. Yaakov Avinu goes for 14 more years. And it's important that we are aware that there is a different type of Torah that needs to be taught to our children when the time is right. And not always do we give it to them when we're in the home. Now, many people that they are today very honest. And they learned that honesty not from their father when they were learning Gemara in the yeshiva, in the study hall, in shul before mincha time. They learned honesty when they saw their father at work. And they saw their father honest. And he would never give people cheap products. And he would stay true to what he promised. That's the 14 years. That's something that you cannot teach your kid in the yeshiva, in the study hall. That's something that you need to give your son, your daughter, when you go out into the real world. Sometimes maybe a person moves out of the community, they move to the city, they move to a place, they go to college maybe, where they're now seeing people that are not as observant as from where they're from. All of a sudden you see people driving on Shabbat, shopping on Shabbat. You see people that are eating maybe in places, maybe it's not more kosher than not kosher. Maybe it's harder to get kosher now. Modesty can be maybe difficult because everyone around you is dressed immodest. This is the 14 years that's needed for a person to understand how do I stay true to my values. And if you're not taught that in the 63 years, you gotta be taught that in the 14. It's a separate book. It's a different masechet. And Yaakov didn't get that in 63 years at home. He knew he didn't have enough. He needed 14 more years. And so when Yitzchak blesses him and he says, Akol kol Yaakov ve'hayadayim yedei Esav, he says to him, the hands are the hands of Esav. The voice is the voice of Jacob. That wasn't an observation. That was a challenge. Yitzchak was challenging Esav and Yaakov. Yitzchak was no fool. We shouldn't think of Yitzchak like he was some hazi, old man that just got tricked by everyone. Yitzchak was very with it. Yitzchak was astute. Yitzchak is one of the avot. Yitzchak was not sleepy nothing. Yitzchak was Yitzchak was sharp. He knew exactly who was in front of him. When he says Hakol kol Yaakov v'hayadayim yedei Esav, he was talking to his son, and he was telling his son something very powerful. Originally, the brachot was supposed to go to Esav. They were supposed to be 4 avot, just like we have 4 imahot. It was supposed to be like a chair has 4 legs. He's supposed to have four fathers. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Esav. Supposed to be 4. But Esav fell short. Esav messed up. And so we no longer have 4 avot. We only have 3 avot. But it was supposed to be a tag team of Yaakov and Esav, of the learner and the businessman. The one who's meek and in the tent, and the one who's out there in the real world. But when Esav fails, Rivka understands that it's time for Yaakov to become a 2-in-1. It's time for Yaakov to be a Yaakov and an Esav. And so she sends him in to get the berachot, and he's like, well, Mom, I can't. How am I going to get in there? I'm not Esav. She's like, well, you got to become Esav. You got to now do both. You got to go into the real world, my son. And he didn't want to. And Yitzchak picks up on all this. When Yaakov comes in, he says, Kol Yaakov, hayadayim yedei Esav. You're no longer just going to have one mission, my son. Now you must evolve. You must upgrade. If Esav fell short, you must pick off where he left off. And now Yaakov must remain the Yaakov with the call, with the voice, with the learning. But he also has to become the Esav businessman. It was supposed to be a tag team, but now you're going to have to do both. And so you see all of a sudden at this stage in his life, 63 years old, Yaakov becomes a different person. You no longer see a Yoshev or Halim in him. You no longer see someone in him who's only learning and steiging. You now see in Yaakov something a little bit different. You see him working for 20 years. You see him dealing with Lavan. He's got a certain salesmanship to him. He's, buying and selling, and he's, shrewd. He's doing maneuvers with the poles and the sheep, and if they can have stripes, it's going to give birth, and he's doing, he's dealing. And then you see him going out and fighting people. You see him confronting Esav. He prepares for battle. It's a different type of Yaakov than we're used to. We're used to a very shy Yaakov, insulated. At this point, though, that all changes. Which now, by the way, it makes sense why he has to marry Rachel and Leah. Because everyone knew originally there was going to be Yaakov and Esav, the 2 sons of Rivka. And Rivka's brother Lavan had 2 daughters. And, he had, Rachel and Leah. And everyone knew it's going to be Esav for Leah and Yaakov for Rachel. But when you no longer have Esav and you only have Yaakov has got to take both. He marries Rachel and Leah. Because now he's 2-in-1. Actually, the Midrash says that Yaakov is very upset the morning after he woke up. And he sees it's Leah, and he says to Leah, you tricked me. Why'd you trick me? It's one thing for your father Lavan, but you should have told me. You should have told me last night at the wedding that you're not Rachel. It was dark. They didn't see back then in the night, and they were sisters. They were pretty much the same age, maybe. So you could see how he would get tricked between the 2 sisters. And in the morning, he sees clearly that it's not her. He says, "You tricked me." And the Midrash says that she told him back, "I learned from you how to trick. Didn't you trick your father? That you're Esav?" That is one way to get your husband to hate you forever. How did she say that to him? But the answer is, she wasn't disrespecting him. She was saying, if you're Esav, which you are now, then you have to marry me. You're both. Right? So Yaakov now, he's gotta be a Kol Yaakov, and this is the challenge that his father Yitzchak tells him. Hakol Kol Yaakov, v'hayadayim yidei Esav. Can you go out into the real world and be an Esav type of guy and remain a Yaakov inside? Can you allow it to not affect you? So he goes for 14 more years to study Torah and Yeshivat Shem Vayetzeh. And that is what Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky says. Now, he's not done, by the way. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky says, if we fast forward a little bit to later on, we read that Yosef was the Ben Zekunim. Israel. Right? What does it say over there? It says that he, Parashat Vayeshev, let's open it up. It says, V'Yisrael ahavet Yosef mikol banav ki ben zekunim hu lo. Israel loved Yosef more than all of his other kids. Ki ben zekunim hu lo. He's his, youngest child, or his smartest child. And look at this. Rashi says, Kol ma shelamad mishem ve'ever masar lo. Yaakov gave everything that he learned in Shem ve'ever to Yosef. And this is actually what made the brothers very jealous. They saw that their dad was teaching Yosef Torah. But says Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky a very interesting observation. If you pay attention, it says that he specifically taught him what he learned at Shem ve'ever. He didn't teach him what he learned for 63 years. He only taught him those 14 years. Why? Why didn't he teach his son the other Torah? And why didn't he teach his other kids? He only taught Yosef. That's very weird for a father to do. My father learned with me and my siblings. My grandpa learned with all the cousins. Why did Yaakov only learn with Yosef? Says Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. He didn't only learn with Yosef. He learned with all of his kids. And he taught all of them Torah. But he gave to Yosef the special Torah that he got in Shem ve'ever. That he gave to Yosef. That he gave exclusively to him. Those 14 years. The Torah of Shem ve'ever. He gave to Yosef. Of course he learned with his son Yosef the other 63. And he learned with all of his other kids the 63. But the difference was the 14. That he only gave to Yosef. And explains Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, now we understand why. Because Yaakov understood that Yosef is going to be the one who's going to need it the most. Yosef is the one who's going to go out. He's going to live in Egypt for 22 years. He's going to be dealing with corrupt, lustful, perverted people. And he's going to need that Torah that I got when I went out into the real world. Yosef's going to need it. The other brothers, they didn't necessarily get it. And if I may say this, you do find how Yosef actually goes into Egypt and he doesn't fail with Potiphar's wife. He stays strong because his father gave him that 14 Torah. And then you read the Torah compares it right away to the story of Yehuda. And although eventually Yehuda doesn't do anything wrong, but it is on a certain level something inappropriate. She was someone lady that wasn't his wife. And you see that he doesn't control himself. Our rabbis notice that these two stories of Yehuda and Yosef, they're juxtaposed in the Torah. They're right side by side. Yehuda and Tamar, and how he does what he does with her. And then Yosef and Potiphar's wife, and he doesn't do it with her. And you read these stories, and they're literally written juxtaposed side by side, contrasting and comparing these two. And again, eventually Mashiach comes from that union, and it wasn't as bad, but it was still something. It was still something, not 100%. And maybe it's because Yehuda was not prepared for the world of Shem ve'Ever. Yehuda wasn't prepared with the unique Torah that Yosef was. So you see the Yosef that Yaakov, the Torah that Yaakov gives Yosef, the 14 extra years that he received. You see, it ends up making a difference. It protects Yosef. And maybe eventually he gives it to Yehuda too, by the way. I'm just thinking out loud. We know eventually when Yaakov and the whole family moves down to Egypt, it says that he sends Yehuda to go build the yeshiva. You know, Yaakov is still creating a bubble, a protective space, a tevat Noah, if you will, to shelter his children, his grandchildren. He makes sure to send Yehuda ahead to go build the yeshiva in Egypt. And this is why he doesn't give that Torah to the other brothers. They didn't really need it so much as Yosef did. But this is, I think, something that every one of us, we are challenged with in our lives. We have access, when we get older, to smartphones and to people and to lifestyles and to tests and to women and to distractions and to drugs. And a person's got to make sure that they're always plugged in to the Shem ve'Ever. We got to find the role models who are in that world that are able to show us how to stay safe. You gotta have role models. And maybe the role model that you had when you were in a yeshiva cannot help you here, because that role model was good for the 67 years or 63 years, whatever it was. But now you need a different role model. Person's got to always learn Musar. Yaakov knew it's not enough to study with my dad Yitzchak. My dad is great, but he's Yitzchak, he's Kadosh, he's Korban. He never left Israel. He never left the study hall, my father. He needed 14 years from somebody else. And Yitzchak wasn't offended, by the way. He knew, Yaakov's right. Go to Shem ve'Ever, they can help you with this. I can't. He integrated it into his world that he lived in, a complicated world. They lived with the Mabul. They go to them. They know how to do it. I don't know how. Person's got to learn Musar always. Study constantly. It's a crazy thing. A person becomes religious. A person goes out into the business world, and then somehow when they go out into the business world, their learning drops. It's the exact opposite. Now you need the learning most. Now you're actually involved. Now you're actually confronting. A person needs to surround themselves with haverim, with mentors. The people that are going to uplift you, inspire you, that can keep you where you want to be, not to allow your values to become discarded. And this is the guide. This is the guide that Yaakov Avinu gives us. That Torah isn't just for the Beit Midrash. Torah is not just theoretical. Torah is like it means. Torah is a Torah. It's a guide. It's a guide for life. But learning how to remain true to our values in the real world, we have to emulate his path. We have to make sure that we are equipped, that we are constantly staying strong wherever we go. And this way we can bring light, we can bring or to wherever we go in the world. Okay, my friends, we'll stop over here. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.